am pleased to welcome Senator Bob Casey, an attorney and politician currently serving as a Senior U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. Among his many accomplishments, Senator Casey has been a fierce advocate for the rights of those with LDs, having introduced the RISE Act to Congress in 2016. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Quinn, great to be with you.
In your view, why is it important that people with disabilities vote?
We're told that something on the order of 35 million people with disabilities are eligible to vote. And that's a huge percent of the actual electorate, the people who will vote this year and will decide the election. So if every American with a disability who's eligible to vote is actually voting, that can have a seismic impact on who the next president is, what the makeup of the Congress is, and so many other elections. If you don't vote, you don't really have power. And if you don't vote consistently, you're going to be at a disadvantage when the policy is decided. So I'd encourage everyone to do anything you can in the next few days to make sure you can vote.
What do you see as the biggest barriers to voting for people with disabilities?
Well, one of the barriers is just that their daily lives tend to have more obstacles generally, and that applies to everything that individual is engaged in their life. Getting out to vote, if you're in a wheelchair, getting out to vote is a more significant exertion or effort than it would be if you don't have a disability. We have some data, unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, but the results are unfortunate. The General Accountability Office, so-called GAO, did a study that showed as of 2016, that's the most recent period they studied, only 17% of polling places in the United States of America were fully accessible. That's an indictment, I think, of our system, that we're still, and I can't imagine if you could do an instantaneous update for 2020, I can't imagine that number would be significantly higher. So we have too many places that are not accessible to people with disabilities in a fulsome way. But I think that the only one of the only, I should say, upsides to a lack of information, and sometimes the spread of disinformation, which is a huge problem in and of itself, is that we have more tools to communicate. Now, because of social media and other platforms to communicate, you can get a lot of information out about voting. And I think even in the midst of this blizzard of changes and confusion and lack of information and misinformation, it seems to me that a lot of voters have caught up because there's been information that's been available to them in ways that maybe we couldn't have provided it 15 or 20 years ago.
Senator, that leads me to my next question. What bright spots in the voting rights movement are you excited about now and in the future?
Well, some of the bright spots are that people, I think a lot of people across the board recognize that voting itself is at risk, that the right to vote is at risk. I think in the disability context, you've got some examples that you and others I know are well aware of. For example, the AAPD, the American Association of People with Disabilities, has the Rev Up the Vote campaign. That's good news to provide information by way of forms and otherwise. We also know that young people with disabilities are particularly active, particularly engaged, and particularly determined to make sure that people with disabilities have information that they need. And Quinn, I know you know a lot about this. But NCLD's Our Time, Our Vote effort will mean that more young people with disabilities have their voices heard. And I think that years ago, you remember the famous line of Justin Dart, the great disability advocate who was pushing so hard to pass the ADA way back several decades ago now. He said, quote, vote like your life depends on it because it does, unquote. And that's literally the truth, not only for people with disabilities, but people across the board, because access to healthcare, access to direct services or home and community-based services, or just the enforcement of our laws can depend largely on your vote.
What would you say to young and first-time voters with a disability to encourage them to go out and vote?
Well, I think it gets back to that idea of self-government. You cannot say that you're self-governing or engaged in exercising your role in that if you're not voting. And voting means not just voting for, there are some people, I hate to dwell on this, but there are some people who walk into a polling place, for example, or maybe even fill out a ballot in a presidential year, and they vote for president and walk out. They call it the undervote, people who vote only for president and walk out. And then they never walk back in for 4 more years, because the vote for president is always the highest. And then sometimes on the same ballot, for example, in Pennsylvania this year, we don't have a Senate race or a governor's race, but we go from president, and then there are races for Congress, U.S. House. But then we have statewide elections for state treasurer, auditor general, attorney general. Often you have a voting gap in the total number of voters between president and the other offices. That means that hundreds of thousands of people in a state like ours will vote for president and stop voting. So I'd encourage people to make sure you vote the whole ballot, go all the way down. All the way down, this year it'll be all the way down to state representative or to a ballot question. And then I'd encourage people to obviously vote in 2020 for sure, but then also you got to vote in 2021 when you have local elections. They're not as exciting as the national elections sometimes, but they matter for school board or mayor or a municipal official or a county official. So we got to make sure that we talk about voting in every office, for every office and in every year. But voting itself for the individual is just an expression of what you want and what you need in your life. And it does directly impact whether you're going to get the help that you need. And that help applies to people with a disability and people who don't have a disability.
Senator, what is your plan to vote, and why is it important to have a plan to go vote?
But my plan has been implemented, but now the second part of the second plan is to get other people to vote. Remind your friends, people you think, oh, I'm sure he or she voted because they're on top of things. Maybe they haven't. Contact family members, ask them, have you voted? Or if you haven't, do you have a plan to vote? How are you going to do it? Tell me how you're going to do it. Or tell me, can I help you do it? So I think part of the plan for those who have already voted is to make sure others have a plan.
How do you think history will look back at this grave moment that we're in now?
Well, I think the historical perspective will be, frankly, pretty negative in the sense that we've had a lot of conflict politically and not enough progress. We've had a lot of acrimony, but not enough momentum in terms of enacting policies that will ensure that not only can people vote, but that they're going to get the help they need to live their lives. And again, I think this is especially significant with regard to people with disabilities, but of course it applies across the board. Look at the where we are right now. We have a raging pandemic, and that might be an understatement, with case numbers going through the roof in all kinds of places that thought they would never have a problem with the virus. Rural areas, rural states, small towns, and even raging in some cities again after after what happened this spring and summer. And in the midst of all that, we don't have a relief bill that's has passed the Congress yet. I'll give you one upside though. I have been encouraged in the last couple of years how people have taken on responsibility to change their country. I saw it in 2017, 2018, 2019. I saw it in 2018 as a candidate for re-election to the United States Senate. But I also saw that leading up to 18 in local elections in 2017 and then again in 2019. So in those 3 election years, or in the lead up to those elections, I saw people engage in changing their government or pushing for changes that I have never seen in my adult lifetime. And this is not something you see in America on a regular basis, and I'm encouraged by that. So I think history will look favorably on that.
Senator, what's next for you?
In terms of some of the issues we talked about today, I think that one thing that I want to make sure that we pass into law that has not been passed yet is a bill that focuses on voting itself and accessible voting, the Accessible Voting Act. That's Senate Bill 3206. I introduced it back in January with Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota. It would require that all voting information, including websites, are accessible to make sure that that information is getting out there in ways that would allow people to have the information they need to vote. So this bill will provide grants to states to make sure the election officials know how to make mail-in ballots and polling places truly accessible. To get that 17% of fully accessible voting locations way up. So that's a piece of unfinished business we got to get done. But I think more broadly, and I'll end with this, we're going to have to pass, and I'm working on now, legislation that will deal with the economic calamity that will likely outpace or outlast the virus, unfortunately. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the virus ends soon, or we can control it in a better way soon, and I hope the economic calamity ends soon. But I'm afraid we're going to have a lot of people out of work for a long time. We need a New Deal-like approach to these problems. We don't need limited, scaled-down, targeted approaches. We need big change when it comes to dealing with the economic catastrophe and also advancing some of the policies we talked about today.
Senator, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and to joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, Quinn, thank you. Thanks for your voice. Thanks for your leadership, and thanks for the work your generation is doing.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.